Zelda is one of the most important video game franchises to ever be made. It's one of the earliest ones too, dating all the way back to 1986. And today on Rayl Deal Games, I'm going to be ranking every Zelda game I've played, from worst to best. Now, I've played 13 games in the series, but we'll have 15 entries on this list, and you'll see why here in a moment. Let's go ahead and dive right in, my guys, with number 15, which for me is going to be Spirit Tracks. Now, I've been kind of thinking about this in the last few weeks and months about going back and playing a lot of old DS games that I was kind of cold on back in the day, and this is one of them. I've never really liked mobile games and movement with either a stylus or your finger. I've never been a big fan of that. And the only mobile game I've ever played a significant amount of was Magic Arena, and it was because at the time I didn't have a device to be able to play Magic Arena properly, like sitting down and actually just playing a game. Mobile games have, they're just outside of when, like the time frame for when I would have been interested in them, because for me, games have always been something you sat at a place to do. It's not something you do while you're like going around doing other things. And Spirit Tracks, beyond this kind of mobile barrier between me and the game, I just don't like as much as other Zelda games, but I would not be so confident as to say it's bad. I would not feel confident enough to say that the next game on this list is bad either. It's just that the medium by which you play the game did not appeal to me. And that's why Phantom Hourglass is number 14. The medium by which the game is presented to the player, the way that the controls are laid out, just aren't appealing to me. It is more appealing than Spirit Tracks in that the game just takes off faster. I mean, by a little bit, it's not by a lot. And I felt like I enjoyed the sailing element of Phantom Hourglass more, being able to chart your course and then needing to dodge the environmental hazards. It felt very Wind Waker-y in a lot of ways. And as you'll see as we go later on this list, Wind Waker I particularly enjoy. Number 13 for me is going to be Zelda 2. I think Zelda 2 has had a bit of a bad rap over the years. Zelda 2 is not a bad game, it just doesn't feel like a Zelda game. That's really it. It just feels like a weird action, 2D action game from the 80s. So there's a lot of the design elements that are trying to ape or copy Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest in a lot of ways with the overworld, except it has this interesting element where you can see random encounters on the map and you can enter them personally if you so choose. And I also really enjoy the way that this is more of an adventure and an open world adventure than a lot of other Zelda games. You know, there's this kind of an interesting piece of trivia about my family, but this is the only Zelda game my dad had ever beaten. I didn't know this until like last year. I had no idea that he'd even played a Zelda game, but this is the only one he's ever finished. And Zelda 2 is quite tough. I would say that it's probably more tough than most Zelda games. Zelda 2 is not bad though, and I quite enjoy it, and at some point I would like to review all of the games that I'm going to talk about from here on out on the channel. And I'm kind of interested to see how Zelda 2 plays out, because it is quite fun, I think, in some ways, especially when you start getting the platforming and the movement down. There's a lot to really like about this game, and in terms of open world exploration, I actually think Zelda 2 did that exploration element better than the first game in a lot of ways. But overall, the core Zelda formula is what we're really here for, and this game doesn't have that formula, so it's got to be a bit lower. Number 12 for me is going to be Majora's Mask. This is definitely not in line with the core Zelda audience, or the core Zelda fan base. A lot of people really like Majora's Mask. I don't. And I'm talking about N64 Majora's Mask here. This is a game that I definitely want to try again. I did not make it all the way through this game, but I want to try again because I do think that sometimes a game can give you a bad first impression, and then it can be one of your favorite games ever made. This happened to me with Dark Souls, the very first Dark Souls game, where I attempted to play it like maybe in 2015 or something, hated it, stopped playing it, and then in 2017 I picked it up again to try, and it became one of my favorite games of all time. And I'd like to see if the same could be true of Majora's Mask, because I do like some of the elements of it. I like the stress that the game puts on you in terms of time and needing to finish things in a timed period. I like that, and I would really like to see if the rest of the design of the game would shift in my mind after replaying it. Number 11 for me is the original Legend of Zelda. The Legend of Zelda is a great game, great NES game. It did not make my top 10 of the 1980s. I don't know if it'll make my top 25 of the 1980s list that I plan to put out sometime, maybe next year. And I really would like to replay this game at some point for the channel, because there's a lot of elements of this game that I think are very interesting. I mean, part of what inspired Miyamoto to make this game was his childhood of exploring caves and forests. And when you look at the game in that way, you can kind of see what he's going for. And he does, especially for an NES game, really make that exploration feel good in a lot of ways. And I've been wanting to do games like The Legend of Zelda, the original Metroid, games that don't give you maps and you have to like draw the map yourself, for the channel at some point, guideless, because I'd like to really put myself in the headspace of somebody playing the game in the 1980s and see what was this game like. And I actually do think that needing to draw your own maps and needing to remember things will probably make me enjoy The Legend of Zelda even more. That's one of the things I really like about like Dark Souls and Bloodborne, is the fact that you have to remember the map. And that's something that's kind of like externalized for the player in the modern era if you just look things up. Number 10 for me is 3DS Majora's Mask. 3DS Majora's Mask is higher for me because I think it fixed one of the big things that I had a problem with Majora's Mask, which was saving, and that's really it. It's just a little bit higher because I felt like the 3DS version, at least at the time I played it, I've since got the N64 version on my Wii U, and maybe that porting is a little bit better. Number 9 is going to be Minish Cap. Minish Cap is an interesting one because this game's actually made by Capcom in conjunction with Nintendo, and you can tell it's a Capcom game because it's quite good. It's from their golden era, from their early 2000s period. This is actually my second favorite top-down Zelda game. I think it's got great adventure elements, wonderful puzzles, also manages to put together some really, really cool dungeons and bosses. I think one of my favorite dungeons in Zelda is the shrunken, like, gosh, there's like a spinning wheel in the middle or something, like a spinning boat or something in the middle of this like inner tree dungeon that's early on in Minish Cap, and that's one of my favorite Zelda dungeons, period. I thought that one's always really, really cool. I've also really enjoyed how for Minish Cap, a lot of the bosses are like just you tiny versus a normal enemy, like a random enemy. I thought that was such a cool element of this game and really fit the shrinking and growing theme of Minish Cap. And this game I definitely want to replay again alongside a lot of old GBA games, because I think there were loads of other great GBA games like Final Fantasy Tactics Advanced or Yu-Gi-Oh! The Sacred Cards that used the restrictions of the GBA to their benefit quite a bit. And I would really like to go back through and play a lot of old GBA games like this one again, to really enjoy the way that they worked around the system constraints more than maybe I did the first time. Number 8 for me is the 3DS port of Ocarina of Time. Now this one actually cleaned up the visuals a little bit, but the big reason why this one's obviously lower than Ocarina of Time is that the 3DS is just kind of unruly to hold in adult hands. It wasn't designed for adult hands. It was designed for kids, so it makes sense, but it is kind of like just hard to play with my hands as they are now, whereas playing on a Wii U gamepad is way, way easier. Number 7 for me is Skyward Sword. I've played the Wii version of this, and I've played the remaster. The remaster, in my opinion, fixes a lot of the problems that the Wii had. It's not just the motion controls, although the motion controls are the big thing. It's also the fact that the remaster cuts out the cut scene that plays when you pick up something every single time. It only plays the first time you pick up something, and then you never have to see it again, and that saves you so much time. I swear, it's like an hour of your time is spent just watching that screen on the Wii version versus the remastered version. And as such, the remastered version is just better, in my opinion. Number 6, and this one is definitely not in accordance with the general Zelda fan base, is going to be Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild, I have always been far lower on than most people. The weapon degradation thing, like, it was something that a lot of people brought up back in 2017 when the game came out, and it definitely sucks. I don't like the weapon degradation of this. It sucks when you pick up an awesome, cool weapon that is supposed to be this epic reward for doing something, and then it breaks in 3 hits and it's over. As such, when I played Breath of the Wild, I pretty much avoided combat the whole time I played. I only fought bosses, and that's pretty much it. I fought like the occasional enemy here or there, but by and large, if there were a bunch of enemies around a chest, I just grabbed the chest and left, because fighting enemies always felt terrible in this game. I always liked this game for its exploration elements, kind of like what I was talking about with Zelda 2 and with the original one. This game definitely got exploration right, and it's very fun to explore Breath of the Wild. There's a lot of cool tools within the game, but then some of the other things that I like about Zelda, such as dungeon design and things like that, were a bit weaker in this game. I'm not as low on the dungeon design in Breath of the Wild as a lot of other people are. I don't need the dungeons to be linear experiences. I just need your thought process that you personally are going through as a player to be more interesting than what the dungeons in Breath of the Wild presented. I also really hate forced stealth sections in games that are not stealth games, and this is not like a big negative for Breath of the Wild, but I did not like the forced stealth section in the game. I will say that one of my favorite things, or no, not one of, my favorite thing about Breath of the Wild is the boss fight against Thunderblight Ganon. I thought this boss fight was cool. I wish the other Blight Ganon boss fights were more interesting and matched the level of this one. I also really enjoyed the difficulty of Breath of the Wild. I felt like the difficulty was right where it needed to be with this game, and I felt like I could die while also trying, which is something I look for in a game. I like when a game has a degree of player failure. When a game is tough enough that you can fail, that's kind of a necessary component of me liking a game these days, because a lot of games you just get through without dying or only dying once, and it harms the experience, in my opinion. Number 5 for me is going to be Link to the Past. A Link to the Past. This is my favorite top-down 2D isometric Zelda game. I mean, this is possibly lower than what a lot of other people would put this game, although I do think 3D Zelda typically gets the top spots for a lot of people. I enjoyed the sheer amount of dungeons in this game. There are loads of them, and they give you very interesting powers to use within them. And it's very clear that this is looking at what the original Legend of Zelda did, and it's trying to push it further. Zelda 2, you know, it fell into that trend in the 80s where the sequel was massively different than the first game, like Final Fantasy 2, very different from Final Fantasy. Castlevania 2, very different from Castlevania 1. Zelda 2, very different than the original Legend of Zelda. And Link to the Past really feels like they looked at that and really pushed it at the other direction. It's kind of the relationship between like Super Mario Bros. And Super Mario Bros. 3. Super Mario Bros. 2 in the middle, very different. And I know that it was based on the Doki Doki Panic game or whatever, but it is different, the one that came to the States. Whereas Super Mario Bros. 3 feels like the natural advancement and progression of Super Mario Bros. 1, Link to the Past feels like a natural progression and development of the ideas present in The Legend of Zelda. Number 4 for me is going to be Ocarina of Time, the N64 version. There is one thing I did not talk about with the 3DS version that I want to bring up, that the 3DS version does way better than the N64 version. That's the water temple. It's so much easier to switch your boots around in that game, and it does make it better. However, by and large, I always prefer the original version of the game, typically speaking. A lot of times things are added or changed about games that either streamline certain elements of it, but within Ocarina of Time's case, beyond that water temple element, I like everything that the original does. I also particularly enjoy 5th and 6th generation early 3D graphics, and I do like how this game looks over the 3DS remake, even if the 3DS remake is technically more graphically impressive, especially for the hardware at hand. Ocarina of Time just really hit that adventure element that Zelda needs to do. A good Zelda game is able to make you feel like you're adventuring through the world of Hyrule, and Ocarina of Time does that quite well. Very, very well, in fact. Number 3 for me is going to be Twilight Princess. Now, one of my favorite movies of all time is the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and one of my favorite books of all time is the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Twilight Princess was heavily inspired by Lord of the Rings, and it is obvious. The game feels like Zelda's take on Lord of the Rings in terms of its themes and world design. I really enjoy this game for that reason. I have seen over the years people talk about how the graphics of Twilight Princess haven't aged well because it's trying to be realistic and it's too old to look realistic. I don't know what these guys consider realism, because this game is not trying to be realistic, not at all. It's just trying to be more grim and dark, which is not realism. Those are not the same thing. And I like the way this game looks. I think it does enough stylism within its art direction to really separate it from other things that were present within the 6th generation, and it is one of the more beautiful games as a result. I also really enjoyed the powers, dungeon design, and boss design of this game. This has some of my favorite tools in a Zelda game, like the double hook shot, that you don't see a lot or ever in other Zelda games. This one is the one, it's either this one or my number 1 entry that I would like the next open world Zelda game to be based around, that them to revisit. I mean, with Breath of the Wild, you know, this is like the original Zelda manifested again. The number 2 entry, Tears of the Kingdom, is like they have added elements of Skyward Sword and, you know, that whole underworld area. I would like them to also maybe add like the Twilight Realm for the next game, or something from my number 1 game, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So number 2, Tears of the Kingdom. I'm definitely in the minority of people who like Tears of the Kingdom better than Breath of the Wild, and it's not close for me. Tears of the Kingdom has better powers. Ascend is one of my favorite mobility tools I've ever had in a game, and I use it quite consistently to break through certain areas of dungeons in ways that you were maybe not intended to. But it's very cool that you can do that. I also quite like the way the story was presented to the player, where you find the dragon tears, and then you have to go through and get them out of order, probably, unless you looked up a guide. I didn't look up a guide, so I got them out of order. And I thought it was so cool to try and figure out the story in that kind of non-linear progression, which is definitely something a lot of people did not like necessarily. There are some of the critiques of Tears of the Kingdom that I agree with. I do think the champions that you gather over the course of the game are kind of lame with the way that they interact or the way that you use them. It really does bog down the game to have a bunch of companions running around with you all the time. And as such, I most of the time had them off. And other than the wind guy I found to be very, very useful and would keep him on quite a lot. Beyond this, I found the final Ganon boss fight to be one of my favorites in the entire series. I might still give Demise at the end of Skyward Sword the number 1 final boss place for me personally, but Ganondorf at the end of Tears of the Kingdom I felt was so epic and cool that I would replay the whole game just to fight him again at the conclusion of it. I felt like they did bosses in general in more interesting ways than Breath of the Wild did. They also replicated that typical Zelda design where you get an item in the dungeon to finish the dungeon with and fight the boss with. Way better than Breath of the Wild ever did, and that's why I would like them to expand on that idea a little bit more. One of the big problems of Tears of the Kingdom, and I as a fan will also agree with this, is that you are menuing way too much in this game. There's way too much menuing going on. I don't know how they would have fixed that with the way that they had made Fuse work and the way that they made Ultra Hand work and things like that. I really don't know how they fixed that. And that's probably why they designed the champions the way they did. But that being said, I would like to actually be able to hold the item and use the item and not have to worry about this shadow spirit guy being near me to be able to use the item. That's one of the big critiques I have with the way the special items for the dungeons and the boss fights work. That's not a big deal, though, because in the grand scheme of things, it still is trying to call back to that old Zelda design, and I think they do quite well. They definitely do better than Breath of the Wild in that particular category. I think a lot of people who played a lot of Breath of the Wild will not like this game for its exploration in the same way that I did. I did not 100% Breath of the Wild. I did not play it for hundreds of hours. So by the time I played Tears of the Kingdom, the base world of Hyrule felt very fresh, and it was like I was exploring it for the first time because of how little I played Breath of the Wild in, the grand scheme of things. I played it till I beat it in 2017, and then I moved on, and I never looked back. And Tears of the Kingdom, I played 3 times as much, because I just felt like the tools were way more fun to play with than the ones available in Breath of the Wild. And my number 1 entry is Wind Waker. Wind Waker is the other game I mentioned that I kind of hope this new version of Zelda tries to replicate with the water exploration. I like sailing around in Wind Waker and finding random islands that you need to chart on your map. And I also really enjoyed the dungeons in this game and the way the final Ganon boss fight plays out and how Toon Link stabs him in the face to end the fight. I felt that was really cool. There's just the art direction is also just a cut above everything else in the series. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom definitely take this cell shading look in a different direction and maybe pump it up a little bit. But the original Wind Waker just hit it right out of the park the very first attempt. This game was definitely treated unfairly back at its release because it did not fit with the gaming trends of the time. I mean, I was alive back then. Everybody wanted dark, gritty games. If I had seen this game back then when I was like 7, I wouldn't have been interested personally. Well, okay, I might have been because I was still playing Spyro at the time, so I might have been interested, but you give it a couple more years when I'm getting into my preteens and my teens, I'm not going to be interested in this game, and that's who Zelda typically was trying to appeal to back then. So it really failed to hit its target audience in the ways that Twilight Princess would hit its target audience. So, unfortunately treated back then, but I think there's a lot of appreciation for what Wind Waker is these days, and I personally love it the best. So guys, that's my ranking of Zelda games. This is one of my midweek videos where it's unscripted and I just kind of rattle off my thoughts. So if you like this video, you can tune back in next Wednesday when I'll be talking about Magic the Gathering. Actually, I'll be sharing my design for a cube I made, which is a draftable set of cards that you make yourself. And I also make a video every Friday. This upcoming Friday, I'm going to be dropping my review for Wolfenstein 3D. My Friday videos are edited, and they're more carefully worded. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, give me a like, a subscribe, and maybe check out one of my other videos on the screen. My big goal for the year is 10,000 subscribers, and with you in my community, I know we can get there. Regardless of what you choose to do, thank you for keeping it real with Rayl Deal Games, and I'll see you next time.